to By a Fire, episode 29. I'm John, and this is my cohort Devin, and we are By a Fire, the fire of current politics in the world and everything else. How are you doing, Devin?
hmm Well, for today and for the events of today, I would like to read a poem.
Sure.
This poem is titled On Learning to Dissect Fatal Pigs by Renee Nicole Good.
Okay.
I want back my rocking chairs, solipsist sunsets, and coastal jungle sounds that are tercets from cicadas and pentameter from the hairy legs of cockroaches. I've donated Bibles to thrift stores, mashed them in plastic trash bags with an acidic Himalayan salt lamp. The post-baptism Bibles, the ones plucked from street corners from the meaty hands of zealots, the dumbed-down, easy-to-read, parasitic kind. Remember more the slick rubber smell of high-gloss biology textbook pictures. They burned the hairs inside my nostril, and salt and ink that rubbed off on my palms. Under clippings of the moon at 2:45 a.m., I study and repeat ribosome, endoplasmic, lactic acid, stamen, at the IHOP on the corner of Powers and Stetson Hills. I repeated and scribbled until it picked its way and stagnated somewhere I can't point to anymore, maybe in my gut. Maybe there, in between my pancreas and large intestine, is the piddly brook of my soul. It's the ruler by which I reduce all things now, hard-edged and damp, splintering from knowledge that used to sit, a cloth against a fevered forehead. Can I let them both be? This fickle faith and this college science that heckles from the back of the classroom? Now I can't believe that the Bible and Quran and Bhagavad Gita are sliding long hairs behind my ear like Mom used to, and exhaling from their mouths make room for wonder. All my understanding dribbles down the chin into the chest and is summarized as life is merely to ovum and to sperm, and where those two meet, and how and what dies there. That's the poem on learning to dissect fetal pegs by Renee
Mm-hmm.
Nicole Good, who
Okay.
was murdered 3 days ago in Minneapolis
You say
by Officer
murdered.
Jonathan Ross.
What is your
Murdered.
what
I
is
say
your
murdered.
what is your like
Well, we can go with
analysis
the
of
legal
the
definitions.
Right, don't
Second
interrupt. Don't
degree
interrupt me.
murder.
Just, I just want to know, um, what is the fact pattern as you perceive it from what you've seen that supports your claims.
Okay, well, so we're getting into the distinction between manslaughter and murder. There
Sure,
are
you're
different
the yeah.
degrees of homicide. Generally speaking, the distinction between manslaughter and homicide, you're asking me to kind of remember, quite a few years, and I really don't do criminal law. But the distinction is generally speaking the mens rea. That is to say, the intent and the mentality of the person in the incident. So, uh, is there a sufficiency of malice in the intent of the killing? And of course, in the trial of Jonathan Ross, if Jonathan Ross were to see trial, which does not appear likely, given that he will probably be granted qualified immunity, and given that the Department of Homeland Security and FBI is working to cover up his crimes despite the blatant video footage of the shooting. Of course, that would be one of the things that I would say would be into the dispute is that there would be a reasonable claim for this being counted as and prosecuted as manslaughter rather than as murder. But then there are the words that he said right after he fired 3 shots into the face of a 37-year-old mother of 3, which was fucking bitch. That speaks towards his state of mind and his intent, I would say. And certainly I would be inclined to convict him for murder.
Well, second degree murder in Minnesota requires intentional killing without premeditation, death caused while committing a felony. Obviously, that's not what happened there, but killing with a quote unquote depraved mind, extreme recklessness, showing disregard for human life. Um,
I would argue that an extreme recklessness showing disregard for human life was demonstrated.
and what was the demonstration of that to you? Obviously, the use of deadly force could be seen as
The use of
disregard for
deadly
human
force,
life.
especially without a warning. He just drew and fired 3 shots into
Mhm.
her head. No warning, no step out of the car. He just drew and he fired.
Was there? I noticed that there was an officer at her window, and that as the car like started driving away, it looked like that the officer at her window had opened her door, and the door kind of
Hmm.
came open as the car drove away. So it looked like they were trying to get
That's
her to get out of the
that's
car. Is
another
that
that's another aspect is that there were 2 officers saying 2 contradictory and conflicting orders to her at the same time. One was telling her to drive off and leave, and
which
one
one
was
was
telling
saying
her to
that?
get out of the car.
Which one was telling her to
I'm
drive on?
not sure.
Because I watched a couple
Well,
of
one of
videos
them
on it, but I
was.
didn't
There was.
hear any other orders
Mhm,
being said personally. But
mhm, yeah. So, no.
yeah, I've watched
She was
about
shot
four different
for
videos
not
of
being
it.
able to do 2 different things at once.
Yeah, yeah, I've watched about four different videos of it. You know, my first reaction after watching all those, just thinking about it and putting myself in the shoes of people in this situation. You know, my the here's where I get stuck. Um, and this is just I'm just speaking from my own personal perspective here. Regardless of the whether the people involved are cops or not, or mothers or not, or who they are, to me is secondary in a way, because I put myself as a driver. If I'm behind the wheel of a vehicle and there are pedestrians around my vehicle, to me, in the way that I personally feel and operate, is that my foot should be fully depressed on the brakes, and I should not be attempting to drive my car either forward or backwards if there's anybody, in the vicinity of my car on foot, pedestrians, especially if somebody is directly next to my car or directly in front of it. And then if you add upon that the fact that these were law enforcement officers and somebody is conducting what appears to be some kind of a traffic stop of a kind, some kind of like a Terry stop type of situation where they're, you know, um, at the door of the car, seeming to be issuing some kind of commands or orders, right? Like driving away in that situation also seems very like something that I would think I would like never do. Like if somebody says get out of the car and someone else says drive away, but there's like somebody in front of my car, somebody next to, like, I'm not driving. I'm not going to take my foot off the brake. I'm not even going to have the car and drive in that situation, or reverse, right? Like I'm going to just
And you assume that you would be perfectly calm in such a situation. Two
I'm not
different
saying I
law
would be
officers are shouting two
calm.
different commands at you.
I'm not saying I would be calm, man. I would not be happy in that situation, but I do think that, you know, this is just where I have a problem, is that especially if I have kids and I'm like there's a certain degree of responsibility that I feel like we can't just say, well, it's just we it's just the officer's fault. In regard, I know, like, we all who are
Well,
against what
we know
ICE is
that
doing
DHS
have a
and we know
different.
that the FBI are lying. We've already managed to establish, the mayor of Minneapolis has established that they have lied about Renee Good's movements and activities on that morning. The
What did
initial
they
claim
say
was
that
that
was?
she was stalking and following ICE agents. That's contradicted. There are multiple witnesses that are basically saying that she was driving back from dropping off her kids at school.
Yeah, the video I've
And
seen shows that her vehicle was sort of parked, like if this is the street, like she was kind of parked, like ICE had pulled up and they were conducting some kind of a thing. And she kind of had, it looked like
Mhm.
she'd pulled up alongside them and had parked. And maybe she was, I don't know if she was filming them or she was just observing. I've heard that she was trying to be a
She was
conscientious
acting as the legal
observer.
observer.
Yeah, something of
Yeah.
that nature. And of course, what I've seen in previous videos with ICE is that one thing that they'll do is if civilians are doing that and putting themselves into that vicinity or following them or different things, one of the things they'll do is they'll conduct a stop, they'll have the person get out of their car, they'll issue a warning and say that you need to leave and get out of our area, you're interfering with our operations here. And then and then they'll warn them if they continue to do it that they'll detain them, and then they'll let them
Mhm.
go. And you know, if that was what they were trying to do
So,
in that
Minnesota
situation.
is a one-party consent state,
Mhm.
which is you can legally record a conversation if one person consents, but it is illegal to record secretively without anyone's knowledge. So basically, that's the distinction that is made in Minnesota state law. Is that basically if you're brandishing a camera, you know,
Yeah,
but
I don't
you
think
know,
there's any
secret
evidence to
cameras
what
are
I've
illegal.
seen that she was doing anything illegal in her presence
Yeah,
there.
a mother of three was murdered in broad daylight in front of multiple witnesses. It isn't an inexcusable atrocity. And mark my words, John, the next thing that's coming is going to be something like a Boston or Kent State massacre.
I
That
mean, it
that
wouldn't.
is something that is my sad prediction for 2026 is that at some point we are going to have multiple American citizens who will be murdered
Mhm.
by ICE agents.
Let me ask you this: have you ever been pulled over?
Yes, I have.
Okay. And have you had a cop come next to your car and be talking to you? And
Yes, I have.
yeah, I think I have too. And now, if a cop was also standing in front of your car, which I've never had happen, had multiple cops, but if you put your car into drive and the vehicle starts moving in the direction of the cop and the other cop and like that's standing next to you, I mean, that's a situation that we've seen many
So
times
we're living under
arrives in
South Park
shootings.
rules. We're living under the rules of the first episode of South Park, where all you have to say is "He's coming right at me." That's
No,
all it takes.
I mean, do you think a car
That's your
like
get out of jail
is it
free
no,
card.
it's not, but I do say I do think that it's well established that a car is a deadly weapon. I mean, that's just indisputable. And if you drive your car directly at a law enforcement officer that's holding a gun out, like you know, if they react and use deadly force to defend themselves, it's going to be really hard to say like, well, they knew you were going to do that and they meant to shoot you and they knew that you were going to try to drive. I mean, this is a guy that, as far as we know, there. I've heard that. I
Yeah,
mean, I
but
haven't
we
established, but
also
he's been
know,
dragged by a
I
car in
mean,
the past, so he's already going to be kind of jumpy in that
he was
scenario.
involved with another very dubious shooting incident several months ago. And, that is all the more reason of he shouldn't have been on the operation and he shouldn't have been on the force. At that time, he should have been an admin leave. So,
This is not an invalid
you
argument.
have
I
an
just
officer.
do you think that like Renee Good would still be alive if she hadn't drove her car and put it in drive and tried to like do what she tried to do?
Given the circumstances, I think I don't think that you're assuming that there's some behavior that could have gotten her from out of the abuse and the random violence of this unqualified and cowardly murderer. And I don't think so, John. I don't think that there was anything that would have been sufficiently placatory to have avoided the violence, the unreasoning and malevolent violence of Jonathan Ross.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I don't think that civilians should be in the place of having to lick the boots of fascists. You know,
I mean,
and
how did we get to that? I mean, like, what do you think? Not driving your car at somebody
I mean,
isn't like licking their boots.
what
I
do you
mean,
think? What do you think, Renee? What is your scenario?
well, I mean, look, we
You've
can
got two
easily
different
turn these
officers
tables. We can
telling her
easily
to
turn these
do
tables
two
because we have.
different things.
There's a lot of videos where you show. There's people that show, protesters standing in front of somebody's car on TikTok or X,
Hmm.
right? And they're like,
Hmm.
people should be able to just drive straight through these protesters, right? And my view is no.
Hmm.
Like, if there's a human being in front of your freaking car, you have your foot on the brake. Period. It doesn't matter if it's a
Hmm.
cop, if it's a protester. Like, we have to, there's a certain like way that we behave in a civil society, and it doesn't involve like driving away from a cop that's a conduct, trying to like talk to you that's at your window. It doesn't involve trying to mow down protesters with your car. Even if you say that you're trying to just drive past them and not hit them. I mean, the fact is you don't know what that person's going to do. You don't know what, that how your car is necessarily going to respond 100%. And there's just, I just feel like there's a degree of civility, that when we're starting to get to a point where people feel like they're entitled to cross this line of civility of I can just drive my car through people or around people and I don't have to respect those people. And like that's a dangerous place for our society to be at. Whether it's somebody,
Well,
if it's
certainly,
somebody that's on
certainly
the other side of
Jonathan
the political
Ross didn't
spectrum.
display any respect for the life of Renee in good. As I said before, there was no warnings. There was no, there was no stop. There was no orders. He just drew a gun and shot her 3 times in the
I mean,
face.
we've been
Where
told
is the
that.
respect
I
for
mean,
life in that?
well, I
Where
mean,
is the respect in that?
you did say that
Where are the
one
norms in
order
civil
was given to her
society
to exit
in
her
that
vehicle,
atrocity? Is Yeah,
right? She was ordered to exit her vehicle and
yes.
she didn't, right?
There were two people giving conflicting orders.
Yeah, that's the one that I need,
I
clarification on because a scenario where a cop says drive away and another one's at your window saying get out of the car, like that is crazy. And again, I'm not saying that I'm trying to place 100% of the blame on one person at all. I mean, I think clearly what you
Mhm.
said that you have an officer that had been involved in this incident before, maybe that's a person that shouldn't, I mean, not maybe, I would say that's somebody that probably shouldn't be out
Definitely.
there, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you look at, there's a lot of elements. It's like when we look at a plane crash investigation, right? There's the Swiss cheese model. And the Swiss cheese model says that it's not just one hole in one slice of the cheese that's what makes the accident happen. It's lots of layers of Swiss cheese on top of each other where all the holes line up like a Venn diagram and there's like a hole that goes straight through the whole entire thing that allows the tragedy to actually end up happening. One of the holes is this guy's out there.
Mhm.
Another hole is maybe that there's two officers giving conflicting instructions to this individual. Another hole is that there's, you know, officers have been given firearms and are told they can use their firearms with deadly force to defend themselves if they feel that deadly force is threatened against them or whatever. Another hole is that she's in her vehicle and she's driving it in his general direction. Another hole is that, all those things they line up and you end up with this tragedy, right? And I think,
Mhm.
we have to look at all the different pieces of that and we can't just take culpability and slap it, well, it's just all this here and that, because I think we have to, I feel like in our society we have to dial back down to kind of how do we get back to a civil society. And with the way that everything is ratcheting up, it's hard for a lot of people, like I sense this from you, it's hard to see how when the side with the most power is pushing things, how it can ratchet down. Because obviously we don't
Yeah.
have an administration and a president that's going to put rhetoric out there
We have
that's aimed
very
to ratchet things
escalatory
down.
rhetoric.
Yeah.
We have a congressman from Texas that is telling Americans that they should comply or die.
Yeah, and they're
That
calling
is
her a
naked
terrorist,
fascism.
right? Like they're straight up gaslighting people about, like I think the president even tweeted that she was still alive or something. Like after, I'm like, what?
Right.
Like
And the
what?
blatancy of the lies make me inclined to disbelieve everything that is offered or argued in the defense of Jonathan Ross because just everything is so contaminated that there is just no credibility whatsoever. But I have to commend you on your lawyering. That's better lawyering than from me.
Well, I'm not
Better
trying to
argument.
lawyer anyone, but I do feel that I mean I watch a lot of civil rights lawsuit type videos where cops cross lines and people end up getting killed or maimed or shot, and a lot of those cases involve Fourth Amendment violations where the officers prolong a stop past what the probable cause or reasonable justification would or the reasonable suspicion would justify. And generally speaking, a lot of times the officers are pushing people to do things that that person has a right not to do, like prolonging a traffic stop where you're saying, I get to keep asking you questions. I get to force you to give me your ID. I get to search your car, right? I get to fish for reasons why I get to search your car and all this stuff. When the person knows their Fourth Amendment is being violated, and then because they talk back to the cop or they give them some resistance, then the cops basically get all they just get their feathers ruffled, and now they want to show this person up by detaining them. And a lot of times they illegally detain them, or they rough them up, or they do all these things just because the person talked back, just because the
Yeah.
person gave them attitude, supposedly, when really they're the ones that
Yeah.
violated them from the beginning. And we see this a lot. And of course, the playbook that always happens is that the local police departments usually start off by just whitewashing everything and justifying what the cop did and everything like what we're seeing from the administration. And then
Yeah.
lots of media
Actually,
attention
I
comes, and then eventually
this
somebody gets fired, and
yeah. Now this reminds me of one of the most disturbing conversations I had. I was taking a criminal procedure course, and basically, I asked the instructor about the scenario of what do you do if during the course of a stop or a police interaction, and the police officer gives you an order to do something that is illegal. They order you to step onto the roadway, or they order you to do something which is a violation of the law. And the instructor was like, well, you should comply with the order and then raise a complaint later. And it's like, what about entrapment? Like, basically the whole question was whether or not law officers can give illegal orders. And it was the position of my instructor, who was a DA in Santa Clara, well, not a DA, an ADA in Santa Clara County, that basically a police officer can order you to do whatever they want. So if they tell you, snort that crack, you'd better comply. And that's somehow not entrapment, which,
well, it
went
comes to the
completely
judge
contrary
later
to
whether
my
whether
conception of.
something's admissible as evidence. Like the cop, like if they're like, I'm going to search your car now, and they go in there and they find a bunch of drugs or something. I mean, if it was an illegal search, you can't just like stop them from doing it. But then when it gets to court,
It's
you
known
could
as the
argue that
doctrine
it's
of
not
the fruit of
admissible.
poisonous tree.
But they can also order you
It's
to do
all
things that are
everything.
literally impossible. Like I've seen this case where this guy who's like paraplegic, so he literally has no control over his legs, and the cop's like, get out of the car, and he's like, bro, I don't, my legs don't work. I don't have my wheelchair here. Like I can't get out of the car. And the guy's like, get out of the car, and then so he just like he's like, all right, fine. And he basically just flops down onto the ground. And the cop's like, get up. You can't be, and the guy's like, I told you my legs don't work, but I can't not obey. And then, of course, this cop ends up getting sued and different things. Or there was one where this guy's
Hmm.
like in a wheelchair waiting in this, he's like in a courthouse or something, waiting for somebody in his wheelchair. And the cops, for some reason, decide that he matches the identity of somebody that like was seen fleeing from the scene of a bank robbery. And so they figure that he's actually like faking being in this wheelchair. And they're like, they basically tell him, they command him to like get up out of the wheelchair and turn around and put his hands behind his back. And he's like, I can't, I'm paraplegic. And they're like, and they basically dump him out of the wheelchair and he falls down, like hits his head and gets hurt and stuff. And
Hmm.
then, it's just like, it's so many ridiculous things end up happening, but yeah, I mean, I'm not somebody that's typically sympathetic to police abuses of people's rights, and anytime there's officer involved shootings or any, even just somebody getting roughed up. I mean, we have to. The normal default assumption I'm going to have a lot of the times is that they've gone too far or they've abused their power and authority in a situation because they're the ones that have the power and authority in the situation. And it's really easy for those situations to come up, and it's very common. And so we see that a lot. And so I think in this particular case, I mean, that would be the default assumption until, we look at the totality of situation and go, you know, is that what happened here? And I think that needs to get played out. I think there does need to be a lawsuit, and it does need to get played out, and people need to see all the evidence and see what happens. Because yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a big
Well, a
public
possible
case.
picture of things to come. International rights authorities are reporting that it is believed that somewhere over 200 protesters have been killed in the recent protests in Iran. These protests have spread to over 100 cities across Iran, mostly as a consequence of the collapse of the Iranian currency, the rial. Um, and there is the question. I mean, Iran's had a lot of popular revolts, in the past 20 years. The question is whether the regime will be able to survive this one, especially on the scale of what's being reported. It is the largest level of public protest since the 1979 Iranian Islamic Revolution.
Well,
So,
do you think this is a direct consequence of the? I mean, the currency collapsing. I mean, the degree of destruction that was inflicted upon their
their
infrastructure
leadership,
and
the
different
leadership of
things when
the
by
Iranian
Iran
Revolutionary Guard, by
by the U.S.
Israeli
and Israel.
strikes.
I mean, do you think this is a?
Yeah, well, that's a factor. Another factor is, they've announced that Tehran was no longer going to be the capital and that they were going to relocate the capital because of the water crisis. They've run out of water. Like, there are
Oh,
literally
well,
people
that'll get
without
people
water in
going.
Tehran.
Wow. Do
Yep.
you think that's
Yep.
also a consequence? I mean,
And
did we
like
damage the infrastructure of the water system there when we with the bombings, or do you think
that
this
might
is
have
just
been a
something
bit
else?
of the. No, no, no. It's really more a matter of the the Islamic government was just sort of crazy on building hydroelectrification and really poorly planned reservoir development, and in the process they destroyed this older cistern system, the
Hmm.
Avat system, which was kind of something built up by the Safavid and Khwarizmid, a really ancient medieval system. Like, for a long time, Iran was sort of renowned as being sort of the masters of hydro engineering in arid places. That was kind of one of the great tricks of the Persian civilization, in fact, along with the apothecary system.
Yeah.
Uh, but the modern, efforts to modernize have resulted in massive water shortages and have basically exacerbated drought.
Like
So
maybe
it's
if they would
sort
have
of
been
a
spending their money on
situation.
fixing their water system instead of trying to build nuclear enrichment, that could
Mhm.
have helped potentially.
Yeah. Or just seeking, better partners or some sort of agreement to have some relaxation of of the sanctions that are against them. Because, that's kind of what has set off this, economy this collapse and this hyperinflation in the currency. So we will see if the Islamic Revolutionary Guard continue and the Ayatollah continues to be brutal enough to maintain their regime. But given the amount of generals and leaders, like the other two successors to the current Ayatollah, both died. One died in a missile strike, and one died in a helicopter accident 2 or 3 years ago. It's I don't know. The world's got its fingers crossed, or we will see. And of course, what will come after the fall of the, I mean, there's a lot of talk online about the Pahlavis, the son of the Shah, which, I mean, I guess he's famous, but I don't really know that. I mean, you know, a restoration of the old monarchy, really? That's what you're going to go for? That's what you're going to press for? Um, given, I mean, especially given that monarchy was basically propped up by the British and the Americans, so the
So I want to talk about something that we discussed in episode 5. I'm gonna share my screen here. Knights of the Golden Circle.
yes,
We talked in the
yes,
in episode 5. We talked about how some of the I think this was under the guise of Reconstruction and the overturning and the overturning of Reconstruction in the South and parallels to other periods
yes.
of conservative backlash. And you brought up basically
Well,
this this idea that had
well,
come
the
up
Knights of the
in like
Golden
the
Circle were actually in
1850s.
1850s.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
so they were before
1850s.
Reconstruction.
Right, but it was like sort of like this idea that the conservative backlash to the Reconstruction could have been fueled in part by people that were still hanging on to some of these type of ideas, in insofar as
Yes,
that this idea of imperial expansionism, people who wanted to basically spread the slave state of the U.S. around, the whole entire Caribbean,
yeah.
and you
And the
know,
Knights of the Golden Circle, in particular, formed after the failure of Jefferson Davis's All of Mexico movement. In 1848, as the Mexican American War was coming to a conclusion, Senator Jefferson Davis of Mississippi was basically advocating for what was called the All of Mexico movement, which would have had the U.S. having the complete annexation and the conquest of all 26 states of Mexico, which would then be established as slave states
right,
under governance of basically southern plantation owners. So basically, Jefferson Davis tried and failed. He was opposed by Polk, and he was successfully opposed by the Whigs in Senate and Congress, or there was enough of they were called the Doe Faces. Doe Faces was the term for people like James Buchanan and Stephen Douglas, the moderate Democrats that were basically like, we're okay with slavery in the South, in the slave states, but we're not crazy about, slavery everywhere. And anyways, the All of Mexico movement was successfully vetoed by Polk. We reached the Treaty of Hidalgo. And then 5 years later, you have the Gadsden Purchase, which is made by Franklin Pierce. But basically, the frustrated people like William Walker, they began organizing the Knights of the Golden Circle. And the Knights of the Golden Circle was organized to encourage what were known as the filibusters, or the freebooters. These were mercenary bands that had participated in the Mexican American War, as kind of famously kind of recreated in Cormac McCarthy's masterpiece, Blood Meridian. But they were individuals like William Walker, who became the dictator of Nicaragua for a 3-year period, and people like Narciso Lopez, who led an unsuccessful attempt to conquer and achieve the independence of Cuba. And so the vision of the Knights of the Golden Empire was a sort of a pan-Caribbean slave empire, which is what we see here shared on the screen.
Right. And so clearly, Trump's current policy agenda could best be described as power projection, um, you know, kind of extending U.S. Geopolitical authority, kind of like we're going to own our hemisphere. We're going to be the ones that we're not going to let Russia and China, you know, come into Venezuela and have control of its oil industry or come into Greenland and set stuff up in
Well,
there.
or
Uh,
what's now being called the Donroe Doctrine, which, and to talk about this, we should explain what the Monroe Doctrine is and what the Roosevelt Corollary is.
so,
The Monroe
before we get
Doctrine,
into
okay.
that, just a distinction that at least at the current face level prima facie interpretation of what we're seeing happening right now with Venezuela and Trump's talk about taking Greenland by force if necessary is not directly tied to establishment of a slaveholding empire across the entire Gulf Coast, Mexico, Caribbean, and Central America, like the Knights of the Golden Circle was, which was just explicitly that, although it was a secret society. Uh, but of course, we could always question the true underlying motives of Trump and what the reality of people's lives in these countries will end up being if this all plays out. But nonetheless, now you're saying it, calling it the Donroe Doctrine, and yeah, what's the Monroe Doctrine? That's sort of a play on
Okay.
words after
The Monroe Doctrine was sort of established by President James Monroe,
in
who
1823.
was the Yeah, yep. And he was the fifth president of the United States during the so-called towards the end of what was known as the era of good feelings. But this was a period just about as Mexico was finally achieving its independence. It was also the period where basically South America was being ravaged by the Bolivarian Wars, which was, Simon Bolivar was initially the great liberator of most many South American countries, but then his attempt to hold Gran Colombia together as one giant South American superstate rapidly fractured into a series of civil wars. And the Monroe Doctrine was essentially that the U.S. government would not countenance uh, any efforts by European powers to reestablish colonial authority over countries in the Western Hemisphere that established independence. That was the original Monroe Doctrine. And later, it sort of expanded and developed further with the Roosevelt corollary. And the Roosevelt corollary was after basically the Spanish American War and after Roosevelt intervened in order to secure the independence of Panama from Colombia. Panama broke off from Colombia. And it was also used during the what was gunboat diplomacy to alter the elections in Venezuela. And basically, the Roosevelt corollary was that the United States reserves the right to intervene in order to ensure political outcomes that it prefers in the Western Hemisphere. Now, this new Donroe Doctrine, as it's sort of being explained by right wing pundits, is that the United States further expands on the Roosevelt corollary to basically have the right to intervene in order to ensure its preeminence and predominance as the hegemon of the Western sphere. So basically, this Donroe Doctrine is that the United States will not suffer Mexico or Canada or Brazil to be an equal or a rival to its power. and that the United States will intervene anywhere in North or South America as it sees fit in order to ensure that it is the top dog of the Western Hemisphere. So
Which
that
is
is
weird
the
because
Donroe
Vietnam and
Doctrine.
Korea and, well, certain other countries like Taiwan, they're kind of not in the Western Hemisphere, are they?
No, no, but I mean, this is related to the recent national security document, which in which basically the National Security Council stated a desire to sort of withdraw and retrench from Asia and from Europe, and instead focus on the United States as the hegemon. And in
Well,
some ways,
here's
many are
my
saying
here's
that
my
it's
my
the
big concern right now is that while yes, Venezuela has some oil deposits and Greenland is kind of close by, Taiwan is clearly of much, much, much greater strategic importance to the United States. And by
and
strategic,
we have basically given
you
China
know,
carte blanche to invade
have we?
Taiwan. I mean,
Is our stance on Venezuela and on Greenland, is that essentially
well,
us?
we've established that we feel that we have the power to just be able to arbitrarily kidnap any sovereign head of state. So, what's going to stop Xi Jinping from sending in a bunch of commandos to grab the president of Taiwan?
I mean, that's kind of what
It's the
I'm
exact same
getting
thing.
at. That's exactly what I'm getting at is what kind of stage are we setting for the situation with Taiwan? Because if we,
We are
my big,
setting a stage for a Hobbesian Thucydides, the weak do what they please, or the strong do what they please, and the weak suffer what they must. That's what we're setting the stage for. Law of the jungle. No other law. I mean, we have, pundits saying that international law is a fiction. You know, we're about to see what a world without international law looks like. And we know from history what a world like international law looks like. It looks like the pre-Roman world. It looks like endless war.
well, that's certainly troubling.
Oh yeah. Well, the thing about the kidnapping of Maduro is that it actually isn't unprecedented. There was the arrest and capture of Manuel Noriega of Panama, and there was also the arrest of President Aristide of Haiti. And then, of course, you have the various American assassination attempts against Fidel Castro, Belenguer in the Dominican Republic, and of course, going all the way back to the thing which set off the Mexican Revolution, which was Ambassador Henry Wilson, the U.S. ambassador, conspiring with Victoriano Huerta to for the murder of the president of Mexico, which is what set off the Mexican Revolution in 1913. So while dark, it's not entirely unprecedented, but as we said, what's to stop Xi Jinping from pulling the exact same stunt on Taiwan? And the answer is nothing. No. There's only force. I hope that the president of Taiwan and the leaders of the Taiwanese government have very good security. They're going to
Yeah,
need it.
well, I mean, they still have some policy commitments from the U.S. with TRA and the six assurances.
Hmm. Yeah,
But
but the question is how much
that's
of those
pretty
are going to
old.
continue? Yeah.
Yeah, and those
Yeah.
are from like
Yeah.
40, 50 years ago. So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, what else has been going on?
Well, I mean, of course, there's the whole thing of us having getting ready to break NATO with, the threatened acquisition of Greenland, which would, Denmark has stated that it would be, a cause for war, that, only the people of Greenland can determine, the status of Greenland. So there's that. There's the ongoing question of whether or not this is past the House's attempts to continue Affordable Care Act Medicare subsidies. If that doesn't happen, then healthcare premiums are going to soar for tens of millions of Americans. Yeah, the world is
I
on
mean,
fire,
what is
and
Trump talking about saying? I mean, because we already have uh, military facilities in Greenland that we operate. Like, what is the actual and Greenland is part of NATO.
Thule
So
Air
what?
Force Base.
Yeah, space base
Yeah.
actually. I mean, when is the actual threat? That he's like, oh, China or Russia will take it if we don't. I'm just like, what is he talking about? Because it's part of NATO. Like, if anybody goes in there, including us, if anybody goes in to Greenland militarily, it triggers a collective defensive response from NATO, which is a
Yes.
nuclear power, multiple nuclear powers.
Yes.
So what's
Three
he talking
nuclear
about?
powers are within NATO. Yeah, well, what is he talking about? Well, ultimately, this is about control of the Northwest Passage. Global warming is making the Northwest Passage, the capacity for the Arctic Ocean as an international shipping lane, more possible than ever, which basically is a great boon to two or three nations of the world: Canada, Russia, and the United States, who are the primary beneficiaries of unimpeded transit across the Arctic Ocean. Um, and so, in that regards, of course, Greenland has long been regarded as sort of a strategic. Is that, I mean, heck, it's the reason why we sent a military presence in to occupy Greenland in 1940 after the fall of Denmark to the Nazis, was in order, the first time that the U.S. had a military presence in Greenland was basically to ensure that it didn't become a base for the German Kriegsmarine. But of course, we returned it to Denmark as soon as Denmark was reconstituted and reorganized in 45 because they were not. And of course, it goes back further than that to 1917. So one of the interesting things is that legally, if we try to conquer Greenland, Denmark gets to have the Virgin Islands back. In 1917, there was a treaty that established that the United States recognized the sovereignty of Denmark over the territory of Greenland and would not challenge it in exchange for the purchase and the transfer of the territories of the Virgin Islands, which were Denmark's Caribbean colony. So I don't know if Donald Trump is going to attempt that swap, but
But like,
but
how
no,
would us taking? I mean, because the way I look at it is, if we take Greenland by force, we would it would actually hurt
that's
our authority in
oh,
the Arctic because for the Arctic
it
Council
it
would all
it
the other
breaks
Arctics,
things
so
into
Canada, Norway, Iceland, Finland, and Sweden would all be like, yeah,
yeah,
no, your transit rights in the Arctic are kaput. Uh,
yeah,
like the native people in Greenland would be like, yeah, we didn't vote for this. This is colonization. Russia and China would be like,
yeah.
see, we this is just every man for himself now. So why should there be any like rights over Arctic
Hmm.
passage? Like are we just
And
relying
heck,
purely on power
if the
projection and just being like,
1917
we're just gonna be the
if the
strong man out here?
1917 U.S. Denmark treaty is not in effect, then Russia's got a pretty good basis for arguing, as certain Russian conservatives do, that the Alaska Purchase was illegitimate.
I mean, do you feel? I kind of wonder if
Alaska,
Trump is just bluffing on this one and just being like, he's just saying this stuff to try to like to kind of like try to strong arm Denmark into finally being like, all right, we'll sell it to you. Like, you know what I mean? Like I kind of feel like, you
Trump is a
know,
bully, and he'll go wherever he senses weakness or the ability. Yeah, so maybe this is just all a massive bullying act. But the thing is that the thing about bullies is that they eventually reach a person that doesn't back up. I mean, this is one of the things about my history, but
Well, bullies
I,
don't usually have
you
the
know,
largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the
bu-
world.
bullies, being bullied, and I was extensively and heavily bullied as a child, and that was one thing that kind of made me a little bit of a juvenile delinquent. I wasn't that much, but basically, bullies taught me that you have to hit back and that you have to hit first. That's what I learned in my childhood, is that if you submit, it only gets worse. The only way to deal with a bully is to hit them with more violence than they are applying to you. That is the only language that bullies speak. That is the only language that tyrants speak. And you can only speak to them in the language of violence and force. And you have to use enough violence and
Well,
force for them to submit. That's the only way it works.
I mean, that might be playground rules, but I mean, geopolitics following that is not necessarily. No, I don't know about that.
You're granting a great amount of maturity to humanity, which I do
Not
not think
necessarily, but I
exists.
just think that when nuclear
We're a
weapons
species
and
of baboons.
weapons of mass destruction
We're
and like
apes
geopolitics are involved,
with
it's
mange.
well, I mean, clearly,
And I'm
I don't
saying
get
is
look.
that
You know me,
the
I don't give all that much credit
intelligence
to
and
humanity, but
maturity
and
of
I do think that
yeah,
a lot of modern conflicts does boil down to the same mentalities. I'm not in a delusion about that,
primate behavior.
but I also think that there's
We're just true primates. That's all we are.
layers to things, you know. So and when you get groups of people
Yeah.
acting and it's not just one person, then it's also different. Anyways, good talk, Devin. This is
Yeah.
end of the episode
A
here,
lot to
but
cover.
um,
Let
it's
us
been eventful.
hope that somehow we have maybe fewer topics to rapidly spread across next time. So
Yeah,
this has been By a Fire.
I've been
We
John. This has
hope
been
to
Devin,
hope you
and
like and
if
subscribe.
anybody watched, check us out. We'll try to have episodes on a weekly
Please follow
basis
us.
here,
Yeah,
and post some back episodes soon. All right, take care.
sounds good. All right, have a good one.
Okay, you're